Hello, everyone. Welcome to Career Launcher. My name is Abhilasha, and as always, every week I will be taking you through one topic of CAT VRC today. So, today for CAT 2026, we are going to be covering para summaries. Let's not waste any time and let's get into the thick of things. All right. So, Open CDC 1 for CAT happens this week. So we are decoding the cat day drill on June 27. Test yourself under cat-like conditions, guys. This is the replica of actual slots 8:30, 12:30, and 16:30. So 8:30 in the morning, 12:30 in the afternoon, and 4:30 in the evening. The three CAT slots are where you will be writing these tests. You report at an offline center with admit card verification, invigilation, exactly like the CAT center, and you compete with cat 26 aspirants in a high pressure environment in a cat proper cat center. All you need to do is book your slots for this thing. So do make sure you're joining in, guys. If you haven't booked your slot till now, go book your slot right away. Last year also we did open CDC and it was very exciting and people got a very good idea of what the actual exam is like. All right, so let's get started with para summaries. Now you do understand para summary. A passage is given to you. You have to identify what is the correct summary of that passage and then identify which of the options is the correct option. So I want you to take a minute, read this, and then we shall discuss what the correct answer is going to be. All right. So let's take a look at this question and see what the correct answer is. Okay, so let's read and see. So it says philosophers have long debated whether happiness is a goal to be pursued or a byproduct of living well. So the discussion is happiness a goal or a byproduct? The Stoics argued that tranquility was the highest good and which was achieved through virtue and acceptance of what lies beyond our control. Aristotle, on the other hand, proposed eudaimonia, which is flourishing, which demanded active engagement with one's potential. Modern psychology has revived this tension. So, in the earlier ages, the Stoics versus Aristotle was where the story was coming from. What is happiness? What is the goal of happiness? Is or rather, what if happiness is a goal or if it is a byproduct? And today again it has happened. Hedonic theories measure happiness as the excess of pleasure over pain, whether while eudaimonic models insist that meaning, purpose, and growth are indispensable. Now, the irony is that people who chase happiness most aggressively tend to report the lowest levels of it, suggesting that the very act of pursuit may undermine the destination. All right, so both there have been two thought processes, one which said happiness is a goal, the second which said it is a byproduct of living well. So let's take a look at your options. Ancient and modern thinkers disagree sharply about happiness, and none of their theories have been validated by science. Well, science did not come into this game, so this is something that is alien to us and therefore not the right answer. Happiness is neither a feeling nor a state, it is the acceptance of circumstances beyond one's control. Well, again, we did not speak about whether happiness is a feeling or a state. So that's something that is again alien and not part of our answer. Look at three. Happiness is a complex concept debated across centuries. We have said that. The Stoics, Aristotle, and modern people are also discussing happiness. Paradoxically, directly pursuing it often prevents its attainment, and that is what he has said. The irony is that people who chase happiness most aggressively have the lowest level of it. So, this is a good one. Let's look at the fourth one. Hedonic and eudaimonic approaches to happiness are irreconcilable, and individuals must choose one. Well, the author has not suggested that you have to choose. So, this part of the passage would be very, very incorrect. Okay, so this is incorrect and therefore cannot be my answer. So, the only one that could really be my answer is option number C. Therefore, we'll take that as our right choice. All right, let's go to the second question. Here you are. Again, I'm going to give you a minute to read this, spend time on it, and then we shall discuss it. I'm removing myself from the screen and also shutting down my audio. Okay, so let's take a look at this question, guys, and we will try and answer this question. Okay, so the oceanic conveyor belt, technically the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, functions like a planetary thermostat. It redistributes heat from the tropics towards the poles. Recent studies using sediment cores and deep sea temperature records suggest that this system is now at its weakest point in over a millennium. So the oceanic conveyor belt is at its weakest. A collapse, scientists warn, would not simply result in colder European winters, it could disrupt monsoon patterns across South Asia and West Africa, accelerate sea level rise on the American eastern seaboard, and push the Amazon towards irreversible dieback. The circulatory system's fragility reveals how tightly coupled and mutually dependent Earth's climate subsystems truly are. Okay, so it is very difficult. A collapse of the oceanic conveyor belt could cause a lot of problems, and all the climate Earth's climate subsystems are very tightly coupled and mutually dependent. So that is what it is saying. The oceanic conveyor belt, weakened to its lowest strength in 1,000 years, yes, could trigger cascading and far reaching climate disruptions worldwide. Well, this could work as a good choice. European winters will become harsher as Atlantic Ocean currents lose their ability to carry. Well, was it only about European winters? No. So, this is a very partial answer. It's very narrow, right? So, I can't take this as my choice. Let's look at C. Climate change is a planetary crisis driven primarily by the weakening of deep sea circulation systems in the Atlantic. Is it driven primarily by weakenings of deep sea circulation systems? I really can't say that. Okay, so therefore, again, this is incorrect. So I will eliminate. Let me look at the next one. The Earth's climate has several interconnected systems, and understanding the oceanic conveyor belt is the key to addressing global warming. Okay, let's understand that it has several interconnected systems is correct. And understanding the oceanic conveyor belt is the key to addressing global warming. Uh, the author does not really say that it is the key. It says that there is a collapse that is imminent and that could cause a lot of problems. So, this again is a very narrow option. So, I won't be able to take it. So, my best choice, option number A, and that's your correct answer. All right, let's go to the next question. Question number 3 for you. Again, I'm going to remove myself from the screen and shut down my audio. You take a minute to read this. All right, I hope you read the question. Let's go to it. So, in the late 19th century, the category of genius was almost exclusively mapped onto men of European descent. So, a bias that was baked into the very instruments used to measure it. So, genius was men of European origin. IQ tests were designed by those who were already deemed superior and calibrated against population that shared the designer's cultural background. So, there were a certain way it was created. Scholars such as Stephen Jay Gould later showed that the data underpinning racial hierarchies in intelligence was routinely massaged, misrecorded, or selectively reported. And yet, the cultural scaffolding built on these flawed measurements, tracking systems in schools, eugenicist immigration policies, differential investment in communities, outlasted the scientific consensus that repudiated them, embedding inequity into institutions long after the pseudoscience was discredited. So, even when these IQ tests were discredited and thrown out, the bias that they had perpetuated just sort of stayed. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at our options. IQ tests are fundamentally flawed instruments that should be abandoned as they reflect the cultural prejudice of their creator. Yes, but this is only one part of it. So it's a very narrow option. Okay. Let's look at B. Biased intelligence frameworks produce distorted science, but their institutional legacies continue to perpetuate inequality even after the science was rejected. Yes, good choice. European scientists deliberately falsified data about race and intelligence to justify colonial exploitation of non. Well, this is something that is not really mentioned. So, alien, cancel, cut out. The history of measuring intelligence demonstrates that science has always been a tool of political power rather than objective inquiry. Has always been is an extreme word and therefore eliminate. Also, political power is not mentioned here. Okay, so therefore not D. So best option will be option B as our correct answer. All right, let's look at question number 4. Again, I'm giving you a minute to read. All right, so let's take a look at this question. The question says language is not a transparent medium through which thoughts pass unaltered. It actively shapes what can be thought. So, language changes what you think. The Hopi language, according to Benjamin Lee Whorf, lacks tenses in the conventional sense, leading its speakers to conceive of time less as a river and more as a cycle of recurring events. Critics have disputed the stronger version of this thesis, linguistic determinism, arguing that humans routinely think thoughts they cannot immediately verbalize. But even the weaker version, linguistic relativity, holds that habitual linguistic structures orient attention, carve up experience differently, and make certain concepts easier or harder to access. In this sense, the vocabulary available to a society is also a map of its cognitive possibilities. So, whatever are the words that are available is what will determine what can be thought. Now, Worf's hypothesis about Hopi language proves that speakers of different language are cognitively incompatible and cannot understand each other fully. Well, he has not said that speakers are cognitively incompatible. This is something that was alien to the passage, guys. So eliminate. Language neither creates nor limits thought but merely expresses ideas that exist independently in the universal human mind. Okay, language neither creates nor limits thought but merely expresses the ideas. Okay, I'll put a star on this. Language shapes cognition not absolutely but meaningfully. The structures of a language influence how its speakers perceive and organize experience. Well, yes, good choice. Look at 4. Linguistic relatively is a more defensible position than linguistic determinism because it makes fewer absolute claims about, well, that's not, that comparison was not really the purpose of the passage. Hai na? So, therefore, that cannot be my answer also. The passage is talking about whether strong determinism is or linguistic determinism is correct or linguistic relativity is correct. And the author actually says that linguistic relativity is a better choice. And therefore, again, B, not really important. So it shapes cognition, not absolutely. So that is what determinism was, but meaningfully. So through linguistic relativity. So C, good choice. All right, let's look at question number 5. We will take a minute to read this and then we. All right, let's take a look at this question. So, corporations frequently invoke the language of innovation to justify erosion of worker protections. They call gig economy precarity, flexibility, and algorithmic surveillance optimization. So they're using the language of innovation to justify the removal of worker protection. This rhetorical laundering is not a new phenomenon. This is not new. The enclosures of the English commons in the 16th century was defended as improvements to productivity, displacing rural population in the name of progress. What distinguishes the contemporary movement is the velocity of transformation and degree to which the affected workers lack the institutional vocabulary or the legal mechanisms to mount effective resistance. The workers don't have a way to resist also. When the language that names harm is controlled by those who profit from it, democratic deliberation about that harm becomes nearly impossible. So when language is actually changing, then people cannot really fight against it. Yeah, so that is your question. Now let's take a look at our answers. Corporations have always rebranded exploitation as progress. Yes, today's workers lack both the language and the institutions needed to effectively resist such framing. Okay, good. Looks good to me. I'll put a star on this. Gig economy workers must develop new legal terminologies and frameworks if they wish to challenge corporate power in democratic societies. Are they only looking at challenging corporate power in democratic societies? That was not mentioned, so eliminate. The enclosure movement and gig economy are essentially identical phenomena, separated only by the historical context. But this passage is not about the enclosure movement or the gig economy. It is about worker exploitation through corporations. Corporate manipulation of language is the primary driver of economic inequality. The primary driver of economic inequality. We did not speak of economic inequality. That's too broad a term, huh? So therefore, this is just too broad and not a good choice. So best option that we have is option number 1, and that will be your answer. Question number 6, that's your answer. That's your question. Let's take a minute, read, and All right, let's take a look at question number 6, guys. So, solitude has been rehabilitated. Rehabilitated means brought back in recent philosophical writings. So, it has been given some importance now. Rescued from its associations with loneliness and antisocial behavior. So, you're no longer saying that solitude is all about loneliness or antisocial behavior. This distinction is crucial. It's very important. Loneliness is an unwanted absence of connection, whereas solitude is a chosen withdrawal. So you can choose that can deepen one's capacity for connection upon return. So it can make you work in a certain way. Okay, so Paul Tillich wrote that language that has created the word loneliness to express the pain of being alone and solitude to express the glory of being alone. How nice. So loneliness is sad and solitude is happiness. Neuroscience offers some support. Periods of default mode network activation, which occur during unstimulated rest, are associated with self referential thinking, empathy, and the consolidation of social memory. In an age of relentless digital connectivity, the inability to be productively alone may be quietly eroding the very capacities that make rich relationships possible. So, you want good relationships, but that can only happen if you have the ability to be productively alone. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the answers for this question. Neuroscience has proven that periods of solitude are neurologically essential to maintaining healthy social relationships. Well, whether neuroscience has proven it, no. The passage says it offers some support. So this is too extreme and therefore not right. Loneliness and solitude are easily confused, but the former is harmful and should be treated medically, while the latter is a choice. The author has not said it should be treated medically anywhere. So, therefore, that's also incorrect alien thought that is there. Solitude, distinguished from loneliness by its voluntary nature, is a meaningful and even necessary practice that enhances rather than diminishes our relational capacities. Good choice. Modern digital connectivity has replaced genuine solitude with a shallow simulacrum that neuroscience shows to be cognitively damaging. Where did modern digital connectivity become the crux of this passage? It is not related. I mean, the passage does not talk about modern digital connectivity. So, this is something that is alien again to us and not the right answer. So, the best answer for us is going to be option number C, and that's your answer. Okay, I hope you got that. All right, guys, the Career Launcher MBA Test Series 2026 is the closest to the CAT exam structure. You should put yourself to the test today for serious preparation. Enroll right away. Remember, CDC 1 is happening this weekend in the centers in the actual CAT slots with the exact CAT pattern of verification of entrance of everything. So if you wish to join up, do remember to hit this QR code, show it, scan it through your phone and join right away. All right, of course, remember to keep practicing with us every Friday, same time, same place. Do remember to join in. And if you like this session, do hit the like button, subscribe to the session, and also share it with a friend. To enroll at Career Launcher, all you need to do is connect with us on 8130038836. All right, guys, that brings me to the end of my session today. I will see you next week, same time, same place. Bye bye.